How do you know when you're living rightly? It's the fundamental question that we're left with reading through the scriptures. In this course, we're going to ask the question, how do we know when we're living rightly? And what clues do we get from scripture, from the Bible, from theology, from church history? And we have one single frame that's left to us by Jesus himself about how we're supposed to live in this world. He says, here's a summary of all the law and the prophets, the whole Old Testament in Matthew 22. It's to love God with everything you have, your heart, your soul, your mind, your time, your money, your affections. And it's to love other people, love your neighbor as yourself. And implicit in there is a third love, loving oneself. What does that look like in a healthy way? What does that mean to care for oneself? What does that mean to love a neighbor as oneself? So it's that framework that we're going to bring to this question of being Christian, being formed in Christ, living as a Christian in the world. I like to think of it in terms of being trees firmly planted. That's a dominant theme in the Bible. And trees, you often forget that trees are simultaneously growing in three directions. They have a strong inward pull that keeps them gathered toward their center, but they're also growing up and growing out at the same time. When you look at a cross section, you see that in terms of rings. So what does it mean to grow upwardly toward God, inwardly in true self-love and self-knowledge, and outward toward other people? That's what we're going to explore in this course. But there's more. In the Bible, we're given a vision of the end of all things, what this whole story is summing up to be, what your whole life might add up to be. It's the upward call. It's the thing that ultimately should tug on all of our hearts. And it's a vision not just of you and God at the end in heaven, but it's this vast city, a new Jerusalem, a heavenly city, and a restoration of all creation in which we're gathered together with other people. And in the Bible, especially in the Psalms, it's depicted as the city of God, this great, joyous gathering together of other human beings in culture and life oriented toward God, our King. So it's that vision that we also use to anchor this class. What does it mean to be a member or a citizen, as Paul says in Philippians 3:20, of that heavenly city, that eternal city, even as we find ourselves mired, mixed up, working out our earthly citizenship? I don't just mean that in terms of a city or a state or even a country. Citizenship writ large. What are the communities that have formed you and made you who you are? What are the places and communities you're a member of? And how does your heavenly citizenship and commitment to that big kingdom shape the way you live out your life here in these small communities, these little cities, you might say? So you could call it being dual citizens. All Christians are called to negotiate and navigate being committed to our citizenship here and our citizenship there. So I invite you to think with me. What does it mean to live rightly in this time? One of the great joys of being Christ followers is that you're part of this huge community that extends around the world, but also throughout time and history. And now that church history has been running for 2,000 years, you have all these friends, amazing friends, some of whom are dead from ages past. I want to think together about this guy, Augustine of Hippo. He was living in the end of the Roman Empire, so 4th into the 5th century. He's massively important and hugely influential in church history for lots of reasons. In fact, Martin Luther, the reformer, said, apart from Jesus and Paul, no one has done more to shape Christian thought and practice than this guy, Augustine. He was from North Africa, and his mother would have been a Berber, indigenous North African. His father was an Italian. He lived from 354 to 430 AD, right during the kind of lingering end of the Roman Empire, even as Christianity was ascending. What makes him so influential ultimately is just that he wrote so much. He had so many big ideas. We have more of his writings than anyone else from the ancient world. 100 books, 250 letters, 1,000 sermons or more, In fact, some of the most famous works of Western literature, like his Confessions, which is his spiritual autobiography. In fact, it's the first spiritual autobiography and the first autobiography that we have in Western thought. What I found so interesting about him, and one of the thoughts that has most shaped up us in the West, is that he sees human beings in a very specific way. Often you hear human beings called Homo sapiens, that is, we are the species of like wise creatures, sapiens. He thought of humans as Homo amans. Amans is where we got amor, or love. That is, long before we're thinking, knowing, judging creatures, we are affective creatures. We have desires, we have cares, we have feelings, and that he certainly didn't wipe out the importance of thinking and reason, but he saw that we as human beings are moved ultimately by what we love. And so his picture of character and his picture of virtue is really a picture of properly ordering one's loves. He wrote to a friend, Macedonius, who was a political ruler, a statesman, and he said, if you want to know someone's character, tell me first what they love. It's good and bad loves that make good and bad characters. And ultimately, he thought of love in its highest, most religious sense of being a kind of worship. The things that we pay attention to, the things we give our time to, the things that we give our money to, the things that concern us, keep us up at night or thinking all day, those are the things that you care most about. In fact, those are the things that you are, in a sense, worshiping. There's an amazing quote by the novelist David Foster Wallace, author of Infinite Jest, a guy who died too early. He gave a commencement address to college students at Kenyon College, and he says this: in the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And an outstanding reason for choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship, be it JC or Allah, be it Yahweh or the Wiccan mother goddess or the Four Noble Truths or some infrangible set of ethical principles, is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough, never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing up, you will die a million deaths before they finally plant you. On one level, we all know this stuff already. It's been codified as myths, proverbs, cliches, bromides, epigrams, parables, the skeleton of every great story. The trick is keeping the truth up front in daily consciousness. Worship power, you will feel weak and afraid, and you will need ever more power over others to keep the fear at bay. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, you will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out. The insidious thing about these forms of worship is not that they're evil or sinful, it is that they are unconscious. They are default settings. They're the kind of worship you just gradually slip into, day after day, getting more and more selective about what you see and how you measure value without ever being fully aware that that's what you're doing. Now, you might disagree somewhat with David Foster Wallace's view of the kind of variety of things that you could set up as an ultimate object of worship. Obviously, he's not a committed Christian and wouldn't see Christ as the only way, but there's a deep insight into human nature there that we often ignore as modern people. And that is simply, we are worshiping creatures, and mysteriously we become what we worship over time. And worship, although it starts to sound really pie in the sky and holy roller, it's very practical, it's very day to day. I mean, in essence, you could just look at your screen time at the end of your day and see where you scattered most of your attention across the internet that day. You could look at your bank account. You could look at your calendar. Just see the things that you pay attention to, that you care about. That's ultimately the essence of your soul, and not only what you are concerned with, but it's what you are becoming. Now we're going to break that down. Augustine dramatizes that story of the ordering of one's loves throughout his own writings, especially his spiritual autobiography, The Confessions. So one way to begin this class is to start introspectively. Start by asking questions that'll help you know more about who you actually are. Take stock. Take a kind of like moral self-inventory. What do you care about? What do you love? What comes to mind? You love your boyfriend or your girlfriend. You love bacon. You love Major League Baseball at-bat app on your phone like I do. You love your family. You love your golden retriever. You love God. Check out the grand variety of things that you love and that we apply the concept love to. It's one of the challenges of the English language is like the scarcity of terms we have to describe these different varied levels of affection. C.S. Lewis wrote a book called The Four Loves, in which he famously charts out how the Greek language has a richer vocabulary to describe the kinds of love that we have for different things. Selfless love for others, agape; philia, friendship love; eros, the love between lovers; and romance. In English, we often just apply blandly love to all these different things, and then it's left to us to ask inwardly, how would you rank those different things that you love? Where does bacon fall on the great scale or hierarchy of things that you love? Is it at the very top, or maybe closer to the bottom? Where does your love for family fall? Where does love for God fall? So there's like this hierarchy of values that we might say, God's more important even than my family, but my family is more important even than my studies, and my studies are more important than the entertainment I have on Netflix, and so on the story goes. But then on the other hand, Augustine says there is the hierarchy or intensity of the love that we have for those things. So there's the value of the things, and then there's the intensity of the love that we have for those things. And ideally, virtue, he says, is rightly ordered love in the City of God, Book 15. And he says in On Christian Teaching, Book 1, that the way to moral virtue is to properly evaluate the value or the inherent goodness of things, and then organize the intensity of your love and desire according to the relative merit or weight or importance of the thing loved. So don't give all your love to MLB, at-bat app, or bacon when you've got to be reserving some of that affection for friends, for family, and ultimately for God. That's the mystery of human existence, Augustine says, is that we don't properly order our love. So this isn't going to be a simple one-session class in which we unlock the mystery of virtue in one day and say, hey, everybody, do an evaluation of the relative goodness of the things you care about, and then just, line up the intensity of your affection for them, and boom, the geometry of morality is finished. No, it's not that simple. If only he knows the human predicament. He knows the human condition is that we often unintentionally are giving our brightest, most important thoughts and affection to things that don't matter that much. Or what's worse, things out of their proper order. So this is famous. You can always kind of pull out an alcoholic addict as an example of this. But if you've struggled with this or know someone who has, this is the irony, is that someone can know that drinking alcohol isn't that important. And though wine might be a good thing in the grand scheme of things, that it shouldn't be the only thing you're thinking about and giving all of your attention and affection to. But the problem with our human predicament, you can take that kind of addict sort of mentality and apply it to other areas of all of our existence, is that you can't unthink yourself out of some of these disordered affections. You can't just sit down, think the right thought, will it, and make it happen. But we are ourselves shaped by an infinite series and varieties of habits, things that we do. And by doing them over and over in a repeated way, as Aristotle says, they become second nature. They become automatic to us in a certain way. So as we look ahead into the syllabus, you'll see that we're going to spend a whole session talking about formation and talking about habits. So as you pivot from a moral self-inventory about what you care about and an examination of where your affection, where your time and attention is going, Augustine invites you to square that moral inward universe with the great grand requirements that God has given us as human beings, the ones we summarized earlier in the double commandments of love. What Jesus said is a summary of the law and the prophets. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So how do you fit that big matrix of all the things you love and care about? Baseball, friendship, education, cool sneakers, really good Korean barbecue, whatever it is that makes you tick. How do you line up that really cool natural variety of things that makes you tick with the call to love God and love other people? Because that is the moral insight Augustine sees in Christianity and in the Bible, and that we want to explore in this class, is that morality is fundamentally about love. It's about affection. It's not about wiping out all of those little loves that you might have, but rearranging, reorienting, healing, and reprioritizing them within the grand requirements of love for God and love for neighbor. So that is where we need to turn now. For Augustine, this is one of the great dilemmas and mysteries of human life, is that by the time you become conscious and self-aware, you already find yourself loving certain things, drawn towards certain things, driven towards certain things. And it's almost sort of a mystery to yourself why that is so. As in that David Foster Wallace quote, which captures it so well, is that you might be really into body and image and desire and attraction, and before you know it, that's actually what you're becoming. You're worshiping it, you're becoming it, and that's a very mean God. It's a very mean idol, because ultimately it can't satisfy you. So it's got you in its clutches. You're looking to it for something that it can't ultimately provide for you. Same would go for power, for knowledge, and down the list. And Augustine goes even a step deeper than that. He says that we ourselves are enigmas to ourselves, or mysteries, or riddles, that sometimes it's not even clear to us what we do want or what we do desire. You might be really driven towards certain things, but then when you get there, you're like, hey, this isn't actually what I wanted. I was looking for that thing over there. That kind of lack of clarity about yourself is a result of the fall, or of original sin, Augustine would say. And he actually says that far from the moral life being a simple journey of saying, this thing's really good, I'm going to love it a lot. This thing's, sort of okay, good, it's a cinnamon roll, I won't love it too much. He says much more complex than that is that we come into the world not with ordered love, but with disordered love, or what he calls in Latin cupiditas. You can hear the term Cupid there, the master of kind of unruly love with his arrows in ancient mythology, that we're prone toward this kind of disordered desire. And Augustine says cupidity, you might call it disordered love, cupiditas. He says it's like the glue of the soul. So you go around with your soul, your attention, and you start gluing yourself to things, and then lo and behold, you find that those things are stuck to you and you're dragging them around with you. And Paul captures this in Romans chapter 7 when he says, why do I find myself not doing the things that I want to do, or doing the things that I don't want to do? That kind of inner tension or rebellion with oneself. Augustine says that this is a result of the fall, or of original sin, this inherited sort of problem of the heart that we got from our ancient parents, Adam and Eve. So what's the solution? This sounds kind of damning. We sort of pop into the world, and by the time you're self-aware, you're captivated by all these disordered loves and affections. Augustine says that there is a solution, and it comes through the inner transforming work of Christ and the help of the Holy Spirit, and by God's grace. And he gives us what I see as the first key insight of his view of properly ordered love. That is, you have to lift up your gaze, your attention, your affection, your heart toward God as your highest good, as the main love, the main feature and attraction in your life. And by doing that, all of the other smaller loves will form a whole constellation around in your life. Okay, easier said than done. This is one of the problems, though, is that often you go to church on Sunday, let's say, you give your heart to God in worship, you sing your lungs out, but that kind of love for God doesn't seem to have any traction in your day-to-day life and the way that you live. And in this course, we want to explore, how do you actually bring that highest love, that higher love, Whitney Houston might say, into the day-to-day grind, the nitty-gritty of our own lives. So the first exercise Augustine gives us in this process of reordering our affections is simply to stand back from your life, to take a step back and ask what it would mean for you, for me, to love God as our highest good. What would it mean to give him the choicest cut of your life, of your attention, of your affection? Is it waking up early in the morning? Is it going for a walk? Is it reading the scriptures? Is it focusing on God? There's all sorts of different patterns and exercises and ways that we will also explore of how you get God first in your life above all other priorities. But there's a kind of trickle down effect when you get that keystone affection and love right. The first and greatest commandment, love the Lord your God. I've always thought of it visually like this river that I know, a river I grew up fishing here in Oregon. It's one of these amazing streams that's sort of like a spring creek. In this case, it's like a volcanic geyser, and it just comes bubbling out of the side of a mountain at full steam. So crusty, dry pine tree hillside here, rushing, lush river covered with grasses and mosses and flowers and tons of rainbow trout. Where does it come from? Actually, hydrogeologists don't know. It bubbles out of the bottom of this volcano somewhere in Oregon. But I've always loved it because I've taken a hike every summer when I go there up to the Headwaters, it's called, the spring, the source, and just gawked at the beauty of this sort of profused sort of river coming out of the hillside. I see that as a mental visual image of how Augustine thinks of God in this world. God is the good God who creates the good creation in Genesis chapter 1. But why is the creation good, indeed very good? Because it shares in God's own goodness. God himself is the good. He's being, capital B, being itself. And everything that has any existence, anything in the world has any goodness because it shares and participates in God's own goodness. Okay, that's a lot of metaphysics. What am I talking about? Rivers, being, goodness. Here's what I mean. Augustine thinks that if you learn to love the good things in your life, they can actually bring you back to their source in God at the headwaters. How does that happen? It happens through properly ordered affection. It happens through gratitude, Augustine says. It happens through a kind of grateful self-awareness that any of the good things that we love in this world, the beautiful design of those Air Jordans, the tastiness of the Korean barbecue, the glory of an autumn afternoon in the Pacific Northwest, the scales on the side of a silver salmon or steelhead, all these things that are so amazing and so good and so captivating and draw our attention and our affection, they're not taking you away from God, or they don't need to, but the heart can actually exult and rejoice and give thanks and enjoy these things in a way such that the heart is also thanking the giver of those gifts at the same time. So this I call the Headwaters Exercise. For many of us, our two lives, spiritual, church, Christian, Jesus-y life over here, and ordinary daily grind, secular life out here, they don't often touch the love for God, the hands raised and the hallelujahs on Sunday morning, and then there's like the rest of life. There's the Rice Krispies and there's the sports and the food and all this other stuff. We have to get over that bifurcation, that dualism there, and start to realize that this life itself is a gift from God, and that we can appreciate, enjoy, and take part in these good things in a way that allows us to appreciate those good things, but also love our way back to their source, the headwaters himself, God, who is the highest good. So this first method of reordering your loves has to do with loving God as your highest good, and certainly loving him straight out for himself, for who he is. But in Augustine's mind, this is a kind of love for God through the good things that God gives us in the world to love. And in loving them toward God and through them toward God, it actually starts to heal and restore our appetites and our relationship to these other good things of which we're partaking. So we'll call this exercise A, the Headwaters Exercise, or what Augustine calls in Latin, in Deo, loving things in God. So it's not that you're loving the Rice Krispies as God, but you're even something as mundane as that, loving them and saying, what an amazing God would create a world with rice and rice patties that can be processed into crispy nutrient goodness in my bowl full of milk on a Monday morning. Like, this is an amazing world. Who thought this thing up? And who thought us up that we can participate and co-create in this cool way? So this is my favorite exercise of properly or reordered love, loving things in God or to God or through God. Now, we all know, and certainly Augustine knows, if you read his confessions or the bits of it that you're being exposed to now, you realize that the propensity to mislove these things, to worship them as little idols, as little gods, and to become like them, scattered and insecure and lusty and greedy and all these things, the propensities run pretty deep, and it doesn't get fixed just by saying, oh, I'm loving this wine and thanking God for it or something like that, right? So Augustine sees a second strategy. The second strategy is not Headwaters' strategy, but what's called the dam up the river strategy. Now, the dam up the river strategy, or renunciation is how Augustine would call it, is this strategy where you look at something that's captivating your attention, your mind, emotions, affections, your obsession, and you say, I cannot have a healthy, properly ordered relationship to this thing. I am obsessed about it in the bad sense. It's eating away at me. It's taking up too much mental real estate. It is corroding and breaking me down. And so Augustine would say, you actually have to, for a time, and maybe for a long time, say no to that affection. Now, that's a mysterious thing because there's some goods, alcohol comes to mind, or even the love of other human beings, or the love of a beautiful body in a romantic relationship. These things can be loved appropriately, and affection can be whole there, and the love can be for the thing but also for God. But for some, it's really, really hard and painful and puzzling and broken, and the only way toward healing is for a season saying no. So while we're on rivers, because I love rivers, there's a second kind of river in the Pacific Northwest. Most of the rivers, as you know, connect back to the ocean on the coast, or even the inland ones. They flow and flow, and where do they get? The Columbia, and the Columbia takes them back out to the ocean. There's some cool rivers in eastern Oregon that flow over 1,000 miles from the mountains to the Snake River into the Columbia back to the ocean. There's a few rivers, though, in southeastern Oregon that flow from the mountaintops, and they just go down into the Great Basin Range in southeast Oregon and Nevada and evaporate. Imagine that. A river that just takes you out from this beautiful stream on a mountainside and then just evaporates in the waste flats of the alkali deserts out there in the Great Basin. Sometimes I feel like that's a metaphor for where my loves are taking me. You have to ask yourself sometime, where is your love taking you? Where is it flowing? Is it going back to the source? Kind of reversing the headwaters now to the Pacific Ocean. Is the love taking you back toward God, or is it taking you out into the void? And if it is taking you into the void, you've got to dam that river up, redirect it into a channel that will flow back to the source, back to the Pacific in this metaphor. The main point is this, is that God's got to get involved in our loves. He has to intrude. And why? Because he is the source of our very being. He is the source of all the good things for which we could love. And indeed, part of our love for things has to include a healthy, whole relationship between us, them, and God. Now, that's true for all the things that take up most of our time and attention. It'd be interesting as an exercise to simply look at your day, map it out. What do you spend your time doing? Where does your attention go? What do you spend your money on? It actually boils down to just a few really basic things. There's food and comfort. There's some entertainment and pleasure. There's some work and study, and then there's friendship. And your day really is just a few of these things. And how you spend your days is how you spend your life ultimately. So the question for us is, how do you organize that day so that it's calibrated toward its true end in God? It's now to this question of how our love for God vertically and our love for all these other good things in our heart of hearts inwardly connects with our love for others horizontally. It's to that we turn next time.